Today we're going to be talking about ordered pairs. You've seen ordered pairs a lot in algebra. Remember that they are going to be in parentheses and you're going to have two numbers. Those numbers might be positive numbers, they might be negative numbers, but an ordered pair will always have two numbers. That's where the word pair comes into play. So let's take a look at some examples. Right? Here we have four quadrants labeled, and it's going to be really important that you be able to identify these four quadrants. The easiest way to do this is to remember that quadrant 1 is in the upper right-hand corner, and then it goes counterclockwise from that. So we start at quadrant 1, and we're going back around this direction, okay? And you're counting in order. I've also included on here, or it's in your book, the signs for each of the numbers. So in quadrant 1, you'll notice that both numbers, in the pair will be positive. Okay. Over here in quadrant 2, you're going to have the first number is going to be negative and the second number will be positive. Okay. Quadrant 3, both numbers will be negative. And then quadrant 4, the first number will be positive and the second number will be negative. And so most of the time you can kind of figure that out if you go and you play around with some of the numbers. But especially right now while you're practicing, it's really helpful to look and see, oh, if I put a point here, I know that whatever the measurements are, whatever those numbers are, the first number is going to have to be positive and the second number is going to have to be negative. And so just for some people in their learning style, that definitely helps them double check their work and make sure that they've gotten everything correct. If you tend to make a lot of mistakes with your negative signs, this is going to be a really important rule for you to kind of pay attention to so that you know what we're doing and which signs are supposed to be where. Okay, now let's talk about actually graphing some points. Okay, so this is our ordered pair, and they have labeled that point P. So when we put it on the graph, we're going to be labeling that point P. The first number is always going to be your x value, and it's always going to go on your x-axis. All right? We start counting right here at the center, which is called the origin, and we're going to count to the right if it's positive and to the left if it's negative. Okay, so our 4 here is positive, so we are counting to the right 4 spaces. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Now I have to pause, and we're going back to look. Over here, our 2 is the y value. Okay, that means we're going to be counting 2 on our y-axis. If it's positive, we go up. If it's negative, we go down. This one is positive, so we are going to count up 2 spaces. So up 1, 2. And this location is point P. So we would put a point here. It has to be at that intersection. It can't be in between the lines. It has to be at the intersection because our numbers over here in our ordered pair are whole numbers. And we have to label that as point P. Okay? So you always go left or right first, and you go up or down second. And that's going to be really important for our ordered pairs. Okay, so let's try another example. Here we have point M, -2, 4. Okay, so again, we're always going to start with our x-axis. So our x value is this first number, and you'll notice that this time it's a -2. So we start at the origin in the center here, and we are counting to the left 2 because this is negative. Okay, so I have to do that first. 1, 2. Then I have to go with my y value, and I'm going to count that on the y-axis, and it is +4. So I am going to go up 4. So up 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll put my point at that spot. Again, I'm dealing with whole numbers, so my point should be right at an intersection of 2 lines. And I have to be sure I label this with the letter that they gave us right before that ordered pair. So this is point M. All right, let's try another. All right, here we have -1, 0. Okay, so on this one, we'll start with our x value, is -1, okay? And so we're going to go back one space. And again, we're starting here at the origin, okay? So we go back one, and then we go up 0. Our y value is 0. That means you don't move, okay? So you stay still if the value is 0. So that means we're stopping here. There's no more changes to be made. And that is going to be point N. Alright? So hopefully at this point you remember how to count each of your ordered pairs and put that point on the graph. Now I want us to go back and see if we can identify which quadrant each of these points is in. So let's go back to P. And on here, we're interested in what quadrant is this point P in. Alright, so remember, we start in the upper right-hand quadrant. That is this quadrant up here. Okay, so we know that that quadrant where we start is quadrant 1. And I would suggest that every time you get a graph, until you feel like you have these completely memorized and you could repeat them to me in your sleep, I would label them every time. Okay, so point P is in quadrant 1. And I'm okay if you abbreviate those as quadrant 1. Right? So you would have to graph this point and then know that point P is in quadrant 1. Okay, let's look at the next one. This was point N. So again, we're going to start our labeling. So this was quadrant 1. We're going counterclockwise. So that's 2, 3, and 4. Alright? So we're looking for point M because that's what we were dealing with on here. And so M is in this top left quadrant. Okay? And so that is quadrant 2. Okay? So we would come over here and we would write out this point M is in quadrant 2. Okay? Good job. Now let's keep going. Okay? This time, we're going to label. So we have quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. Remember, we always start in the upper right-hand quadrant and we go counterclockwise. Now, this one's a little bit trickier. You have to really think back to last year and what you learned because it kind of looks like it might be, oops, I want to switch colors there. It might be in this top quadrant. But you know what, it's also touching this bottom quadrant, so how do I decide? Is it quadrant 2 or is it quadrant 3? And this is why I was telling you, it's actually a little bit of a tricky question. This point is right on the line, so it is not in a quadrant. So the answer for this one would be no quadrant. Okay? Because it is on one of the axes, in this case it's on the x-axis, it does not have a quadrant, okay? So that means any point that fell on one of these lines, the y-axis or the x-axis, the darker lines that are on there, those answers, if it asks you which quadrant, are going to be no quadrant, okay? Now, let's look at something a little bit more challenging. Let's look at how this is going to apply in geometry. So you'll notice here, we have to graph a polygon. That's a geometry term that we'll be talking about this year. And so it means we're going to graph all 4 of these points, and then we are going to connect them consecutively. So we'll connect P to Q, and then Q to R, and R to S, and we'll actually connect S back to the beginning at P. So I want you to try graphing these on your own. So I'm going to give you a second to do that. I want you to hit pause, and then I want you to double check it with what I have on here. Okay? Okay, so now you can check where you have drawn your points. And remember, like I just said, we're actually going to connect these points. So you're connecting them in alphabetical order, and then the last one connects right back to the beginning. And so here we have created a parallelogram. And we'll talk a lot more about those this year also. Okay, so not a whole lot harder, just a little bit. And now you can say that you have graphed a polygon. Okay, let's look at another example. Okay, on here, they want us to graph 4 points that would satisfy this equation. So we're actually going to practice graphing a line. So we have a couple of options on here. They just want 4 points. So if you were reading this question in the book, it would ask you for 4 points that satisfy this equation. So what we're interested in is we need to choose your 4 favorite numbers. Now I'm going to suggest that especially here to start, you choose numbers that are lower. My favorites are usually something along the lines of 0, 1, 2, and 3. And you can either make a T-chart like I have here, or if you want to make a graph or a table, right, then you are welcome to make a table like that and put the little cross marks in there, and that's fine. But you need 4 points, okay? Those 4 points are going to go in place of the x value, right? They're going to be on the x side. The reason for that is because we are going to take these 4 numbers from here and we're going to plug them in for x in this equation here, all right? And so that's going to give us the y. So we wanted to choose the x values because this equation is already set up to y equals. So it's going to make our life a lot simpler. Okay, so let's take our first number, 0. We're going to plug that in, so we have y equals -0 minus 2. Now, you can't really have a -0, so this basically just cancels itself out. -0 and +0 are the exact same thing. It's just 0. And so we end up with y equals -2. So we're going to write that in our table down here, or in our T-chart. Okay? Now, we're going to try our second number. So let me give us a little more room here. And this time, I think I erased part of my y, sorry. Let's clean that up. Okay. So this time, we are going to plug in 1. It's our second number down here. We're plugging it in for x. So you have y equals -1 minus 2. So if you don't remember how to add and subtract with negative numbers, remember I have a video up on my YouTube page or on my Schoology page where you can watch, and it has a fun little song about adding and subtracting with negative numbers. So -1 plus -1 minus 2, you have the same sign, so you're going to add the numbers and keep the sign. So you have negative, and then the 1 and the 2, you add those together, so that's going to be a 3. So you have -3 here. Okay? The next point, because we have to fill in our whole table here. Okay? Our next point on here is 2. So I'm plugging that in. So I have y equals -2 minus 2. And again, I'm going to have same sign. So I'm going to add and keep the sign. So they're both negative. So I'm going to keep the negative sign and add the 2's together. So I'm going to have -4. And finally, I am going to I need to plug in my 3, okay, into this equation. And again, I'm still plugging these numbers in for x. So I have y equals -3 minus 2. And they're both negative. So again, I'm going to add the numbers and keep the sign. And so -3 minus 2 is going to be -5. And I know that these numbers down here right now don't look like it, but they are actually ordered pairs. So I'm going to turn each of these into an ordered pair. And all I'm doing is I'm just writing the numbers again, but into parentheses this time. Okay? And I want you to see if you can graph them. And pause the video, and then come back in a second and check your answers. Okay, now you can check your work, and you'll know that you did everything correctly for a couple of reasons. Remember that this equation that we were given is a linear equation, so this has to make a line. So if you couldn't draw a straight line through those points, like if one of them had ended up over here or something, then you would know you had made a mistake. But all of ours, you can draw one straight line through, and so you know that you did that correctly. And I've color-coded each of mine so that you can see how those match up. I hope that this was helpful. Thank you. Have a good day.